Shalom Chavrim. It is a pleasure to get to come and speak with you guys again, and I have with me Brother Gary Skogebo. He is the chairman and founder of the Night to Honor Israel of Southwest Florida, and he may not like me saying this, but I think he's a historian as well, especially when it comes to Israel. So it's an honor to be able to have him with us here tonight, and I know you guys, whether you're watching us on YouTube or WBN TV, it's going to be a privilege and a pleasure to get to watch him. On WBN, if you're watching on the broadcast there, be sure to note on the beginning of this this film here, we'll have the number of parts that this will be in. It may be 2 or 3, it may be 4, have no idea at this time now. But we're not gonna slow Brother Gary down. And if you want to catch it in its entirety, you can either visit our website, IsraelReturns.com, or you can go to YouTube, Ben DeNoon YouTube, and catch the entirety of this message there. At any rate there, and of course if you want it on DVD, we'll offer it in that format as well, and part of those proceeds will go to the Night to Honor Israel, Brother Gary Skogebo being the chairman of that. Brother Gary, go right ahead. Pleasure
Thank you,
to
Brother
have you
Steve.
with us.
Welcome, and I'm in awe of your knowledge, and so it's wonderful to be here. Brother Steve, tonight I wanted to lay a general outline, particularly post-World War I, regarding the history surrounding Israel, because we hear so many things on the news, and particularly things coming out of our State Department, and of course we know the White House, that are not historically accurate.
Exactly.
Regardless of the feelings that people have, they're not historically accurate. So we're going to take a moment and we're going to go back to the mid-1860s and take a fast trip forward post-World War I.
Amen.
And I'm going to start out, Brother Steve, with a quote.
Amen.
Now this quote was from 1990, the former U.S. Under-Secretary of State, Eugene Rostow. Now he's going to make a statement here that's based on what was legally recognized by the U.S. State Department, and here it is. Charter. The Jewish right of settlement in the area is equivalent in every way to the right of the existing Palestinian Arab population to live there. Now contrast that today when we hear that the settlements in Judea and Samaria
have to cease.
Israel's capital, in eastern Jerusalem, how somehow they're living there illegally, or that they're practicing apartheid, are just absolutely not true. And we're going to touch on those things in this segment of time that we've got.
Amen. Amen.
So, if you'll permit me to go back to 1869.
Amen. Absolutely. And I just tell you something too, Brother Gary. When you just quoted there what the UN mandate was then, and yet when Bill Clinton was in Israel, gosh, what, a couple of months ago, he says to Israel, unless you accept a two-state solution, there will be no state of Israel. I mean, that is appalling. For a president to say that. Of course, I like Gershon's Solomon's comment back to him. He didn't know what he was talking about. So we'll get into that later, though. But yeah, interesting.
It amazes me, anyone that knows anything about just post-World War I history, how we can hear statements like we're hearing.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, Steve, and you know this, the predominant nationality living in Jerusalem in 1869 were the Jewish people.
Yes, it was.
And Mark Twain, you might remember that Mark Twain, in his travels to the Mideast, wrote that it was a complete wasteland. How could anyone live there? There was no population center per se in terms of a formal government there.
Absolutely.
And yet we know Zionism, God began to return the Jewish people en masse as he prophesied that he would and promised that he would.
Yes.
And so now we get to that period of time post-World War I. Actually, let's go to 1917. And the Ottoman Empire falls. Now, the Ottoman Empire controlled, as you know, large segments of North Africa, the Mideast, Eastern Europe, and it falls to General Allenby and the British. As a matter of fact, we'll put a graphic up on the screen. It's rather, it might be a little difficult to see, but it's a large area. Israel, as we know it today, would have been a backwater of an area where nobody was living. So it wasn't like somebody had a formal government there other than being part of the Ottoman Empire from 1517 to 1917.
In fact, Brother Gary, what's interesting, and a lot of people may not know, and this is one of the vital reasons why I wanted Brother Gary to come and join with us and speak to us about this here, because of Brother Gary's knowledge, but the Palestinian people, what people call the Palestinian people, were immigrants into the land. When Israel started becoming a nation, they needed manpower. And these were Arab people that were coming into Israel because of the employment opportunities that were offered there. And
actually, Brother Steve, just to clarify a key point, as you know, the Romans hated Judah so much that they changed the name to Palestine. And the term Palestinian was a reference to the Jewish people, and only recently did the Arab brothers and sisters assume that name. So we had anyone living in that area could technically be called a Palestinian Jew or a Palestinian Arab, but it's only relatively recently that when most people hear that term Palestinian, they immediately think of the Palestinian Arab. So, but thank you for bringing that up as well.
Amen.
And we know that the Jewish people bought that land again. It was, in some areas, malaria infested.
So in fact, they planted the trees there.
Yes.
And I forget the name of that tree, Brother Gary. There is a tree. It grows very tall. It's kind of like bushy on its arms, but it's a very large tree. And they planted those trees there to help absorb the swamplands. A lot of people think of Israel as only a desert, but from when you go just north of Tel Aviv, going up towards the Jezreel Valley, there was a lot of swampland there. A lot of people got malaria, especially the early immigrants into Israel, the Jewish people that were coming home. And it was the Jewish people that helped dry those lands up so that they could kill off the mosquitoes and not end up.
They invested, as you pointed out, money, their hard work, and their lives.
Every tree that was planted in Israel was planted by the Jewish people.
So the League of Nations, to take people back to the predecessor of the United Nations, incorporated the recommendations. Lord Balfour was a British diplomat, and there was a strong desire that Israel, again, should be a reconstituted homeland. And so in 1920, the Balfour Agreements, the League of Nations then passed the Treaty of Sèvres. As a matter of fact, most people don't know, if you were to take the area of the Mideast and look at a blank wall, painted white, there were no boundaries, it was the League of Nations, Steve, that charged the two principal allies of World War I, which were Britain and France, to carry out the edict of the League of Nations and reconstitute the nations and redraw the lines of those countries.
Including Israel.
Including Israel. Now, the Treaty of Sèvres specifically specified there was to be a new Israeli state. 2 years later, in 1922, the Palestine Jewish Mandate was passed. And it specified that Israel was to be the first nation on that blank wall, reconstituted and drawn. And the League of Nations specified that Britain would be the one to oversee the redrawing of those lines until Israel officially became a nation. And that Palestine Jewish Mandate even specified the land grant that Israel was to have as the first nation reconstituted. Are you ready? Are you ready for it, to hear what it was?
I'm ready. You guys ready?
We're going to put a graphic
people,
up.
Brother Gary, they have no idea.
They have no idea.
No idea.
There'll be a graphic on the screen, and the graphic will say Palestine. Now that's in reference to the Palestine Jewish Mandate that we just talked about.
Yes.
It included all of present-day Israel, Gaza, the Golan Heights, Judea and Samaria, which was renamed, as we know, by Jordan to the political name, the West Bank, and all of Jordan, present-day Jordan.
Yes. And as the people can see, as it's on the screen right now before them, a lot of the land that is now Jordan is part of Israel. And what's ironic, and maybe we can share a couple of quotes here from Gershon Solomon. On Gershon, the flag that he has for Israel has the majority of what you're seeing right now on our screen. You're seeing this land here. And if we can get an image, and I'm sure I can, from Gershon here, we'll also include in there, Brother Gary, the flag that he has that shows the true boundaries of Israel. And Gershon, though, he does it from the biblical standpoint. So it's a little different than what we're seeing here on the screen, right. But yet the point is, God gave Israel this land.
That's exactly right.
We were put out for a season, but he said we would return.
Right, and we're talking post-World War I.
Yes.
And of course we know there's a tremendous history that the Jewish people have, that God's covenant with them prior
Absolutely.
to that. So people then would say, well, if this land, by League of Nations decree, was to go to the very first nation that was to be redrawn in the Mideast, which was the new reconstituted state of Israel,
yes,
what happened?
Exactly.
Well, in 1922, the British, who were charged by the League of Nations to implement this policy, this treaty, this decree, violated the mandate. When we use the term mandate, that's the order that the League of Nations gave. And they violated the mandate and gave away 77% of the mandate to the Hashemite Arabs, who had been sympathetic to the British during World War I. And that became Transjordan.
And Brother Gary, just so people can understand as well, when we're talking about the League of Nations, this is what we call today the United Nations. It grew from being the League of Nations. Yep. And so why do they not seem to get this?
Especially since there's been no other recognized body that has come up with any subsequent treaties. There are things that we'll talk about later in negotiations. If you do this, we'll do this. If you do this, we'll do this. The problem was the other side didn't do this.
Exactly.
But we're talking about actual treaty and by decree, what Israel, post-World War I, what Israel was to have been back in 1920-22. So, in 1922, 77% of the land then is given away illegally, but the League of Nations was so weak. That's one of the reasons that it went by the wayside and again was reconstituted into the United Nations, but still those decrees were agreed to. Mm-hmm. A year later, in 1923, the British violated the mandate a second time, and they gave away 1% of the original grant to the French to go to the Syrian mandate, what we would call the French mandate to reconstitute Syria. So that left approximately 22% of the original land grant. Right.
If I'm not mistaken, when we look at this, now this particular map, and we put this back up on the screen for you here, because we're not seeing Damascus here at this particular point here, but if I'm not mistaken, that's pretty close to where, in other words, it looks like Damascus either may or may not be inside the mandated borders. Or does that say that on there? Because I can't see it very well.
Well, Syria hadn't been constituted yet. It was known as, the French were responsible for the reconstitute of the Syrian mandate.
Okay.
The French mandate were to reconstitute Syria. So all the countries that people might be familiar with today, for example, Saudi Arabia didn't come into existence until 1932.
And so many people, even myself included, Brother Gary, other than the fact that, history is something that you have a passion for, but many people, and many people that are watching the program here with us, have no idea. We think of Saudi Arabia and Syria, all these countries as having always been. I mean, now granted, the Arab peoples, the nomads, whether it be the Bedouins or whatever, they've been in these regions for millennia of time as well. I mean, you can go back to the time where the Bedouins that were in Saudi Arabia that have been there since the days of Moses, and many of their towns are named after Moses. In the Arabic language it's Musa, and they'll call this the Well of Musa, things of that nature. So yes, they've been there, but not as unified nations.
Right, not as a formal government.
Exactly.
Not as a formal government. So for now we fast forward to 1946, 1947. And the new the new United Nations, by now we've got Islamic nations across, Arabic Islamic nations across North Africa. Of course, we know well populated in the Mideast by now.
Yes.
And now after World War II, there's a worldwide consciousness to again establish a state of Israel. And so now the new United Nations makes a proposal to take that remaining 22% of the original land grant and essentially cut it in half and give half of it to yet another Arab nation. That would be Judea and Samaria. And then the other half to the new Jewish nation. Now, the Jews were so anxious for a homeland, they initially said, well, if that's what it takes. But it was the Arabs that said no, absolutely not, because they wanted it all. So when Israel became a nation again in 1948, we know that within 24 hours they were attacked.
Yes.
On another night, fighting another battle for this very same city.
Ezra, 1948, you were a soldier in Israel's army, fighting for independence.
Right.
What happened to you?
We were told that we were going to liberate the old city. We felt flying, reaching the skies from excitement. It was a dark night, but through the dark, we could see the flashes of the blows of the bomb.
And that war lasted for approximately a year and a half when an armistice was declared. Now, most people don't realize that at the end of that armistice, Transjordan, which had changed its name to Jordan, illegally annexed Judea and Samaria, or the West, and changed the name to the West Bank. Because that land, technically today, is still under mandate. In other words, the borders, even though we know and believe that ultimately that land was given to the Jews, we're talking post-World War I now. Historically, that land was still in a state of mandate, meaning that Palestinian Jew or Palestinian Arab could live there until the final borders were determined. Let's go to our next slide.
And you know what's kind of ironic, Brother Gary, is even on the West Bank, it should look, as we look at this picture here of the 1947 Israel there, and of course you can see the West Bank, and during the 48 war we took the Sinai Peninsula as well, as we see here on the dual map to the right of your screen. But the West Bank, it is still under Israeli control as we speak now. Why don't people realize that this is actually belongs to Israel?
Exactly. So what we're going to do now is emphasize that Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, the political name, was illegally annexed by Jordan and renamed the West Bank. So now we fast forward to 1967, when Israel has to fight yet another preemptive war.
Yes.
The Six-Day War, fought and won in just 6 days, has been called by some a true miracle. At the same time, others insisted.
Israel, among other things, and I use the term recovers, They recover land that's still in a state of mandate that was
Absolutely.
to go to them according to the League of Nations.
Yes.
They're not occupying anything.
It can't be considered occupation when it's already mandated for Israel in the beginning.
And not only that, Steve, the United Nations directed Israel to administer the area until final borders could be worked out between the two principal parties, Egypt and Jordan, who then renounced any claim to it. In other words, Jordan renounced any claim to Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. Egypt then renounced any claim to Gaza. Well, guess who then stepped in to say, well, if they're not going to claim it, we want it? The PLO. Matter of fact, in the Charter of 1964, the PLO Charter specifically said that they did not want Judea and Samaria, recognizing that Jordan had in fact claimed it. When Jordan then disavowed any claim to Judea and Samaria, that's when the PLO said, well, if they're not going to claim it, we have a stake in it.
And this is when Yasser Arafat comes along as the head of the PLO.
Right.
Was he already there? Because I wasn't sure of. I know when he died when I was living in Israel. Of course, everyone knew he was sick, and there was a lot of accusation that the Israelis poisoned him, and we kind of helped his case along. Well, if we did, I hate to say it, but thank God for it. But he died the day I flew out of Israel, Brother Gary, coming back to the United States in 2004. That was in November. I forget the date I flew back, but he died when I got on the plane.
We'll talk about him in a minute, Steve.
Okay.
I want to get back to 1948 when Israel became a nation. There's a couple of key points that most people don't realize. When Israel became a nation in 1948, they invited all Palestinian Arabs living in the new Israel to stay and become citizens. 160,000 did stay. They became prominent leaders in the new Jewish government, everything from the military to the Supreme Court. But other leaders, other Arab leaders, instructed the Arab people that were living in Israel to leave, literally overnight. Mm. And as they moved into the Judea and Samaria, which would be later politically named the West Bank, all the other Arab nations, with the exception of Jordan, would not take these people. Well, first,
that's exactly right.
They told them that leave because we're going to defeat Israel, then you can go back and take your original houses and more. Mm-hmm. So these people left thinking they were coming right back after Israel was defeated. Now remember, 160,000 stayed. Between 400,000 and 700,000 Palestinian Arabs chose to leave, thinking that they'd return soon.
Yes.
And gain the spoils of war. Jordan was the only nation that actually took some of these refugees. They would become known as self-induced refugees. That's important also to remember. Mm-hmm. Other Arab countries, however, refused them.
Amazing.
Amazing. Now, the other thing that people don't realize, and I need to talk about Jordan for just a second, is that back when the British gave away 77% of the land that was to go to Israel to set up an Arab state, and it became Transjordan, no Jews were allowed to emigrate to the new Transjordan. Think about it.
Oh, gosh.
So today, or back then in 1948, another equation that nobody talks about were the number of Israeli refugees or Jewish refugees. And people go, well, what refugees would that be? All across, again, North Africa, all the Islamic nations, Arab nations, when Israel then declared its independence and was attacked, there was persecution among the Jews living in these countries.
And many of them forced to leave.
Many of them forced. You had up to 800,000 Jewish refugees.
Yes.
That were now fleeing these countries. And we know the numbers today that are living in some of these countries compared to what they were back then.
Yes.
In the West Bank area of Judea and Samaria, there were over between 70 and 80,000 Jewish refugees that had to leave, even though that land was still in a state of what we just talked about, mandate. So the new fledgling nation of Israel absorbed approximately 600,000 Jewish refugees in a very short period of time.
Yes.
And approximately another 200,000 went throughout the world, as we know a lot of them came to the United States. So we need to keep that.
I am glad that you were able to join us this evening with our first part of, this is actually a four-part series on this film here on Israel 101. Our guest that we had here, Gary Skogebo, very well known. He's a pilot and flies around the world, and yet an incredible historian. He is the founder and chairman of the Night to Honor Israel of Southwest Florida. And we're in a four-part series here that we just put together, so hopefully they will air consecutively if I can edit these things fast enough for the television broadcast on WBN and also for YouTube. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to kind of air at the same speed that I'm doing here on WBN. And again, I just want to let you know there's a lot of other things that I'm putting together for you, especially because of the hour we're living in. Those of you that may not know, as the sun set this evening, we are now on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. According to the correct calendar by some rabbis that are in Israel that have been there since the destruction of the first temple, they're descendants of those rabbis there. This is something I'll kind of get into with you a little bit later, but today is the day that Yom Kippur actually begins. Please consider contributing to this ministry. There is a lot of things happening. Many of you guys know we are on the verge of the gospel that is returning to the Jewish people. And that time is rapidly approaching. If you are a Christian, this is the hour that you are able to make that difference. As Joseph stored up food in the Bible during his time for his own people, for the sake of the Jewish people, as well as for those Gentiles that would be there during the 7 years of famine, this is the opportunity you have to make a difference for both those that are left behind as well as the Jewish people that will be hearing the gospel for the first time. God bless you. Again, we're still looking for those of you that know how to translate in multiple languages so we can put more of this together. Thank you and good night.